honored to introduce the next speaker from Columbia University, Dr. CHRISTINA HOVEN. She's my longtime friend and also a mentor for everything. But I will try to introduce some of her study, maybe in mentoring, that everybody can know her more well. OK， 我想 Dr. HOVEN 她有一个中文名字叫侯文的这听起来像小说的女主角，这个我们当时帮她取的。那我想她长期从哥伦比亚拿到博士学位之后，就一直在哥伦比亚大学任教，然后从事研究。那一开始都是在做儿童的跟青少年的 mental health research， 特别是在 Epidemiological 上面。现在就是在 Psychiatry 的 Epidemiological 的这个 department 任教。那他大概是在美国是第一个就是做这种当时的 World Trade Center，World Trade Center 的 attack 之后，他去做，特别是关注这些小孩子，特别是 PTSD 的这些小孩子，因为当时候有很多的像消防员警员都在那边这个丧死在那边，但是因为像 Staten Island 这个整个 island 里面，大部分的人都是，就是好像有一个家族性的，就是大家都是警员或者是消防员，所以每一个小孩子基本上都是互相认识的。我想这个 PTSD 是一个非常严重。那后来他就有非常多的研究，那因为最近他比较他做了一个欧洲的研究，包括相当多的国家，他是从12岁以上所有的这个 mental health 上面的一些问题的探讨。那最近又负责南美，就是南美那边，他主要当然是要看这个像他在欧洲的时候，事实上就是在看很多，特别是为什么有一些地方的女孩子为什么女孩子的 suicide rate 为什么会那么高？就是要探讨的为什么，就是为什么有一些地方有一些特色就是说为什么那个地方那个女性会特别高？那我想他最近有一个南美的这个 project 也是在探讨相关的问题我想我就介绍到这里。那我想我就不浪费太多时间。OK， and further, and I think we will welcome Dr. CHRISTINA HOVEN to give us the talk from the epidemiology perspective in child abuse, globally, locally, and cross-generationally. Let's welcome Dr. HOVEN.
So, good morning. I first want to thank Dr. Chenwei Wu for the opportunity of being here, and I want to recognize the organizers of this conference. It's a critically important conference, and it's my honor to be here to talk to you today about it. I also want to acknowledge my Wadapangyo, my longtime friend Chang-Po Wong, who I was fortunate to have in my group for many years. It was a matter of great privilege to have him there. He, as you, I hope, all know, he's an extremely smart, capable person, and he added considerably to the work of our group. I want to take this opportunity to recognize another member of my group who's here, Yi-Ju Shu. She's a member of my group also and a native of Taiwan, and it's a privilege to have a second outstanding Taiwanese in my group. It's what makes our group great. Okay? So, I want to talk about this important topic of child abuse, which encompasses many things, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, It has all kinds of ramifications for the development of a child, and it has all kinds of ways of being expressed in a family and in a community. It's I'm going to give you an epidemiological overview, and to do that I want to talk first globally to just show you what we know, which unfortunately is not a lot. Then I want to talk about a study that we have done in New York City over the past 10 years, trying to understand the complications in the lives of people who have very challenging environments. And in every country, in every city, in every corner of the world, there are people just like in this study. So I want to explain the study. I want you to understand all the work that's gone into trying to figure out who these people are and what's happening in their lives, including the history of abuse. And that abuse has ramifications throughout. And then I want to talk about some very recent analyses that we've done on that population, trying to understand the relationship between a parent's own abuse and their child's abuse. And it turns out that there's a very clear relationship, and that we haven't known until now. So the question is, how do we know what we know? Well, as I said, I'm very fortunate to have a large epidemiological research group, and so one of the things that we do is very detailed data collection. And you cannot make scientific decisions if you don't do the work to generate the information that's required. So one of the things that you need to keep in mind is the requirement of prevention. That's the most important thing. But how do you prevent it? You can't just prevent. You have to figure out what's causing the problem. So that's where epidemiology comes in. We try to figure out what are the most approachable risk factors that you, as the clinicians, can go after to try to prevent the ramifications of abuse. Okay? So this is the kind of focus that our group takes. It's a life course perspective, and as I said, we have been looking at the population I'm going to talk about for 10 years. We have other populations that we've been looking at longer, but for this particular population, this is what we are looking at. So you can see all of these different interests. We collect information on them, and then we try to put them together to see if we can understand particular issues about that family, about that individual. And in this case, we look at all of these things to try to figure out what are the ramifications of abuse. Now, I am not doing a study about abuse. I'm doing a study to try to understand the ramifications of children living in abusive situations. That is, they may have poor housing, and we can say that societally that's abuse. They may not have adequate food, that's abuse. We can say that they're being given a bad education, that's abuse. There's all kinds of abuse. So there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, societal abuse, income abuse, housing abuse. There's all kinds of abuse. So we're looking at all of those things here to try to understand the ramifications. So these are the kinds of studies that we do. As John Wong mentioned, we did a major study here right after 9/11, and so many of the studies since then have incorporated a major focus on the exposure to trauma. And one of those exposures is the trauma of abuse. So these are the international studies we're engaged in, and these are the local studies we're engaged in. So we have lots of data and lots of perspectives on what's happening to children as they grow up and their families. So to do this kind of work requires using a strict methodological approach. And again, I go back to, if you want to figure out what to do and who to do it to, you have to have good measures. So these are the kinds of things that we focus on. Sampling, if you take a clinical sample and you say that is what the population is experiencing, that's wrong. A clinical sample is not a community sample. So to get a good representative sample to truly understand what's going on, you have to have representative sampling. We always try to match our studies with controls so that we can make a comparison. We always do, what most people don't do, is we do face-to-face interviews. We go into people's homes and we do 3, 4, 5, 6 hour interviews, private interviews with the child and private interviews with the parent, usually the mother. It's a very different experience than sitting in a clinic and asking a person questions than to go into their home and to actually observe what the siblings are doing, what the house is like, what are they experiencing. 2 weeks ago, we had an experience in our office. We had an invasion of bed bugs. Where did the bed bugs come from? They came from having done an interview in a home that had bed bugs. The bed bugs got into the bag that carries the computer. They brought them back to the office, and the office got infected with bed bugs. But if you don't go into the home and you don't experience the bed bugs, you don't know what the people are experiencing. So just quickly, here is the inclusion of the family. So many people do studies of children, child abuse, anything else about children, and they fail to include the family. So one of the things we always do is include the family members, and as I said, it's usually the mother. Sorry to say to the men in the room, but women are better informed. Okay, so these are the kinds of information that we collect, all kinds of information, including biological information, cardiovascular information, etc. These are trying to understand the total picture. Okay, so given all that, what do we know about child abuse globally? So these numbers may seem high, and they may seem extraordinary, but the fact of the matter is that all of these numbers, 1 in 4 adults were physically abused as children, 12% of children were sexually abused in the past year. These are numbers globally. They're not New York City numbers, they're not American numbers, they're not Taiwanese numbers, they're global numbers. They're from studies all over the world pulled together, and what do we know? We know that these are very high numbers, but we also know that in fact 1 in 3 people don't tell anyone that they were abused. So getting the information about abuse is one of the hardest things you have to do to try to figure out who to intervene with, because people don't want to tell, right? So as high as these numbers may seem, people aren't telling. So we know the numbers are even higher. But it's a very difficult subject to study. It's a very difficult subject in the clinic for you to intervene on. This is not something that is easy to do, and it's not something that's easy for the subject to talk about. Okay? So this one here, 1 in 5 women versus 1 in 13 men report being sexually abused as a child. Okay? Well, those are not numbers that we generally think about. So again, here, children aged 2 to 4, 3 in 4 experience violent discipline by their caregivers. 6 in 10, these are 250 million people, are punished by physical abuse. Now, what is physical abuse? Again, there are different ways to measure it, but this is not a mild tap on the wrist, tap on the bottom. We're talking about abuse. And these numbers are very high. What are the ramifications of that? We don't know. So when I say to you, you are embarking and some of you are already doing this work, and many of you are interested in doing this work, it is so important to do, and we know so little about it. So here, slightly more than 1 in 3 students, and this is 13 to 15, experience being bullied. Is bullied abuse? Of course it is. Of course it is. And there's lots of evidence now about bullying, because bullying is actually easier to study. It's easier to study. It's not, it's usually taking place between someone outside of the family, whereas abuse is frequently taking place within the family, making it harder to talk about. Okay? So here, 1 in 2, 50% of the children live in countries where corporal punishment at school is not fully prohibited, meaning, I don't know what happens in Taiwan, but it means that the teacher can actually hit the children. And we know that there's lots of abuse from that. Again, violence. Every 7 minutes, an adolescent is killed by an act of violence. Abuse, an act of violence, right? 15 million adolescent girls have experienced forced sex in their lifetime. There was an article today in the BBC, if I remember correctly, it's approximately 25% of all women had their first sexual experience as rape. Right? That's the BBC, right? Rape. Forced sex. That's abuse. Much of that abuse takes place when women, females, are girls, young girls. Now, one of the problems that we also know is that a lot of this abuse takes place and emanates from the fact that women, girls, are second-class citizens. They can be abused. It's a lot more acceptable to abuse a girl than not. They don't count, right? Okay. So, based on data from 30 countries, only 1% of adolescent girls have experienced forced sex, reached out for professional help. 1%. 1%, right? So, the work that you're doing is, people aren't going to come and tell you. They're not going to come and tell you that they were forced into sex or that their father's been abusing them for 10 years. They're not going to tell you. You have to elicit the information. And that's the challenge as a clinician. And my colleague, Dr. Ansel, is going to talk about many years of experience eliciting the reasons for people having experienced trauma in their early life and what that has done to them subsequently as adults. And he's going to talk about that and how you can hopefully get this information early on so that people can have an intervention. So, what do we know about violence against girls specifically? Girls, as I said, are unfortunately primarily the target of abuse for a whole variety of reasons, but it's certainly not unknown to you that girls are second-class citizens. In some countries, they're third-class citizens. So what do we know about girls' deaths due to violence? So here we have some rates from different parts of the world. You can find your area here, and you can see death rate per 100,000, right? It varies considerably, just within Asia. Here we have 19%, here 19 per 100,000, and here we have 4 per 100,000, and worldwide it's 9. Now, I dare say that these numbers aren't correct. They aren't correct. But they are the numbers that WHO uses because it's all they have. So we had an experience a few years ago, for example, we were asked by WHO to do a suicidal autopsy in a little country in Central Asia, Tajikistan. The published rates by WHO were 3.2 per 100,000 for suicide. we went and we did the study. It was actually 34.4 per 100,000, one of the highest rates. But it doesn't get reported. It doesn't get reported just like sex abuse doesn't get reported. These are things that bring great shame to the individual. They bring great shame to the family, to the community, to the religious community, to the general community. You can't talk about them. So the numbers are not correct. And so one of the things we're trying to do is to get the correct numbers. And that takes the kind of science that we are engaged in. And it is not easy. So again, 19 in South Asia, 4 in this area, and worldwide 9. So what about the deaths due to violence as girls enter adolescence? So we're not just talking about the 4-year-old being abused by the uncle or the father. We're talking about girls entering adolescence when, in fact, they become much greater victims for the larger community, whether it's the uncles, or it's the grandfather, or it's the grandmother, or it's the neighbor, or it's the teacher. So once a child enters adolescence, a girl, she becomes that much more vulnerable to abuse, physical and sexual. Right? So here is a good example. So this is the early on, this is the violence right here. And then as they enter the next age group here, this expands, and the next age group, and now we're talking about 15%. And again, these numbers are all underestimates, but it's what we have. Okay? So here you can see it. Now, what does this tell us? This tells us that one of our biases, one of our prejudices, we all have it, is that abuse of children is something that only happens among poor people, it only happens among minorities, it only happens among people who are mentally ill, all kinds of excuses that we can come up with and labels to give people, and they are the ones that are doing it. That's just not true. And what this shows you is that, in fact, in most countries with data, and that, of course, eliminates a lot of countries, children from wealthier households, some of Taiwan's wealthier households, are equally likely to experience violent discipline as those from poor families. It's no different in Taiwan than it is in Vietnam, than it is in Cambodia, than it is in Zimbabwe, than it is in America, than it is in France. We're all the same, right? You don't have to be poor to be abused. You just have to be vulnerable. And if you're vulnerable, if you're a child, and particularly if you're a girl, right? So, the question was, what do we know about abuse locally? So, this was the challenge. How do we do better to get the information that we can then design interventions, we can design prevention. You just can't assume that everyone's being abused. You can't assume that you can afford to do the kind of interventions that may be needed for every family. So you need to find out who, what are the reasons, what are the risk factors, and what you can do about it. So here you can see this is child maltreatment, which covers all of these different categories, in New York City. So neglect is the largest. Neglect. Kids get left at home with no supervision, they get left out on the street, whatever. So you can see these different categories. They're quite different, and you can see sexual abuse is 2%. Is that real? I don't know. I don't think so. But it's what we have. It's what gets recorded. Physical abuse. So we were trying to figure out what to do. This is an updated slide, but we were trying to figure this out 10 years ago, what to look at. So we ended up creating what we call the stress and justice studies. It's a study, a series of studies being done in the Bronx, and I'll go through that in just a minute. It's been funded a number of times by the National Institute of Health, the National Institute of Mental Health, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, the National Institute of there's lots of them. We've been funded by all of them. So I just want to go back to this slide to show you. This is the study I'm talking about. So we've been doing genetics, we've been doing MRI, and most recently we've been doing sleep. Trying to understand what's going on with these families. Because what we understand, having done these two baseline studies, is that these children have disturbed sleep. We know from a pilot study that the children whose parents are substance abusers, even before the child initiates any use of drugs, we found a brain anomaly. So we're trying to understand from the different perspectives what is going on in these very high-risk children. So these are the kinds of things we've been looking at. This is, I think, a very detailed explanation of the kinds of topics that we have been addressing for the last 10 years. And this, of course, is the parent, and it's always so critical to get the parent's perspective on what's going on. And you'll see at the end here when I talk about this relationship with the child and the parent, why that is so important, and it's almost never done. Okay? So here's the socioeconomic status in New York City. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is Manhattan here. This is Brooklyn. This is Queens. This is the best Chinese food in America, right here in Queens, in Flushing. And this is the Bronx. And this is Staten Island. And this is where the World Trade Center towers stood, which some of you may be more familiar with. So this is the city. This is New Jersey over here. And this is Long Island. And this is Westchester. So this is the city. And it's the question is, you know, where do the rich and where do the poor reside? And again, we were not looking to do a study because people are poor. We were looking to do a study because people have very challenged lives. They have challenged housing, they have challenged jobs, they have challenged education. They are challenged on all fronts. So we were interested in that population because they have a lot of exposure to trauma, all kinds of trauma. So we wanted to look at them. So that's why we were thinking about the Bronx. And these are some of the details. The Bronx overrepresented by higher rates of every major criminal justice indicator for New York City. While only 16% of the city's total population, it has 22% of all the arrests in New York City. Now, does that mean the people in New York City and the Bronx are breaking the law more frequently? Not necessarily. People in the Bronx are more likely to be Hispanic, and they are more likely to be poor, and we know that criminal justice is not meted out evenly. So, but this is the data. And almost 25% of all the sentences to long-term prison come out of the Bronx. So that seemed like a place we wanted to look. Dr. Cheng over here, he and I both used to be at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, which is in the Bronx. And it's a wonderful medical school, and it serves the community very well. But it's in the Bronx. The Bronx is a wonderful place. It's a big place, it's a wonderful place, but it has the worst statistics in New York City. Okay, so this is what we were trying to do. We wanted to understand impact over time of the criminal justice system. That's what we were focused on as a way of having one particular event in a person's life that would be uniform across all of the index cases, right? But what we wanted to look at were the ramifications of those children's lives. They happen to all have a parent who were involved with the criminal justice system, but we were trying to understand everything about those children, including the abuse. Okay? And we wanted to track the development of risk behaviors leading to the child's possible involvement. And very importantly, we wanted to identify potential intervention points. So here's what the sample looks like. This is the population rather. This is the Bronx, New York City, and New York State. So as you can see here, again, the Bronx is very different. So for whites, it's only 10% of the population. New York City is 32%, New York State's 56%. So you could see these differences. The differences all stand out. Income below poverty, 31%. Very different from the state or the city. Household income, 35,000, rest of the city, 59,000. And remember, this is 10 years ago. And unemployment rate was 12.7 at the time, 8 and 7. So again, the indicators were the Bronx is a troubled community. And here again, percent of frequently distressed, 15.9, much higher. Mental disorders, this is based on New York State records. This is here premature mortality, 348, terrible. Child mortality rate, 45.9, terrible. Infant mortality, 5.2, terrible. And here's the firearms, and actually it looks better than the state, 4.9, 6.5. So, and one last one here, these are the health indicators. HIV, twice, right? Obesity, inactivity, diabetes. Look, it's a troubled community. And the question is, what does abuse have to do with all of this? Are you more likely to be obese if you were sexually abused as a child? Are you more likely to drop out of school if you were abused as a child? Are you more likely to go to jail as a 20-year-old if you were abused as a child? Nobody knows the answers to that because nobody's wanted to ask the very difficult questions and to talk to the same people over and over again over a long period of time to find out what actually happens to people and what happens to them when they become adults and what are the consequences of those early life experiences. So when I said earlier that the data we have, whether it's Taiwan or it's New York or it's England, it's not very good because we haven't been asking the questions and we haven't been doing longitudinal epidemiological studies that keep asking the same people and to try to see what's going on. No one is in isolation. We are all made up of our history, our family, our community, of the relationships that we've had over a lifetime. That's who we are. You're not unique because you came into the world just the way you are. You're unique because your set of experiences are your experiences. They're not mine. They're not mine. And that's true for all of us. But we have to try to understand the relationship of those abusive experiences and how it has a negative sequela on you as an adult. And that's what we're trying to find out. So again, here's the investigations by the boroughs, abuse, neglected investigations. This is that somebody called, or they saw in the court, or they saw in the school that there was something going on with this child that they needed to call in the authorities. And here is the difference between abuse and neglect investigations in the Bronx versus the other boroughs of the city. These are the children, 26,000. It's the second smallest borough in terms of population. And here it is, right? This is the rate, 7,206. Look, The city population, 5,000. So the authorities are being called in to investigate abuse cases in the Bronx more than anywhere else in New York City. But what do we know about those abuse cases? What do we know longitudinally? Very little. That's what we're trying to find out. So this is just a simple model that we kind of think of conceptually when we think about how do you study, follow, think about families and the relationship of events and exposure to trauma. And this is just a very simple model that shows this feedback loop. If the parent has a mental illness, or the parent has a trauma, or the child has a trauma, it's somewhat circular. Again, you are not out there alone. No one is alone. You are part of a family, you're part of a community, and what you do and what you think and how you behave is always coming back, round and around. So when you were the good little girl, the bad little girl, you had a certain reaction from your parents and from your siblings. Different from when you were not so good, right? It's circular, it's a feedback loop. And the question is, how does abuse from a parent feed back into the child's ongoing behavior? Do they become an abuser themselves of the next generation? Do they then abuse their siblings? What do they do? So this is just to tell you, you can never do this kind of work alone any more than you can grow up all by yourself. You have to have people that you collaborate with that know things that you don't know. And in this case, this was a legal firm, and we were able, somewhat surreptitiously, to get into the courthouse and to get the cases as they went before the judge. Just before they went before the judge, they had spent at least one night in jail. And some of them had spent 3 nights in jail. Many of them, it was their first experience, and for others, they had been there many times. And that's how we got them, and those were our collaborators. And the question is, the work that we do, we always try to incorporate an element of social justice. The world isn't fair. It's not fair to lots of people, whether it's women. 50% of the world's population are second-class citizens. It's not fair to immigrants. It's not fair to minorities. It's not fair to lots of people. It's not fair to the disabled. It's not fair to the elderly. So all of our work, we try to build in elements of social justice to see if we can help change the world. Right? So this was the study. Again, we wanted to look at the course of psychiatric disorders. So if you're abused, and we find that out when we first interview you at the age of 9, and you are being abused or you have been abused, what happens in terms of your development of psychopathology 5 years later, 2 weeks later, 10 years later, or when you're 40 years old? Are you more likely to become depressed? Those are the kinds of questions that we ask. What happens to your educational achievement? Do you drop out of school? Do you become a star student? What happens? What are the other psychosocial factors of the parents, factors in the children of the parents involved? Who are these parents? What are their histories? Why are they abusing that child? Those are the questions we have to ask in detail about the parents so we can understand the parent. And we want to understand longitudinally the specific impact of child exposure to this parent in the development of their disorders. Okay? This is, again, a simple model that we're trying to answer. These are the outcomes that we're trying to get to. These are the different outcomes over time that a person will have. And these are the inputs that we're studying, right? So we're looking at domestic violence, abuse as a child, all of these different elements. But we are all complex creatures. There isn't one clear relationship here to here. Everything is mixed up. And the challenge of doing this kind of research is to try to identify the different factors and to sort them out so that you understand the relationship. So when you look here at whether the child has psychopathology, whether the child is a substance abuser, whether the person just doesn't function in society, whether the person has dropped out of school or is a professor, or what they have high-risk behavior, they become a thief or whatever, or they're involved in the criminal justice system themselves. Hopefully we can explain these by doing a good job of understanding and collecting information about all of these things, and then try to figure it out, including the role of abuse over here, which we have been collecting. We are now trying to do a fourth wave of data. So over time, we can answer these questions on the end in relationship to abuse. Okay. So the sample has 762. It's, and you can see here it has index cases and controls. The index cases are those cases whose mother or father was involved in the criminal justice system, and the controls are people in the neighborhood whose parents were not involved in the criminal justice system. We have two samples, one of women involved and one of men involved, and even though 80% of all the cases in the court are men and only 20% are women, we couldn't get the men, not because they wouldn't participate, but because they no longer have a relationship with their child, and that was required to be in the study. So we had no idea about that when we started. So 80% of them, we still couldn't get them because we required that they have a close relationship with their child within the past 6 months. And many of them didn't, so they couldn't be in the study. Okay, so it's a longitudinal study, it's still going on. And here is what the demographics of our sample look like. It's almost exclusively Hispanic and African American. And again, we are not doing a study of minorities. We are doing a study in the Bronx, which happens to be overwhelmingly minority. And we are doing a study in the court. And the court is, for whatever reason, over-inclusive of minorities, right? So it can never be said that America does not have a history of racism. We have tried to get rid of it. Many people have worked very hard to get rid of it, but it's still there. And when I say that women are second-class citizens, that goes for the United States just as much as it goes for Taiwan and most of the world. Okay? And racism, America, a good example, black men in America had the right to vote 50 years before white women. So people don't know that, but that is the history of America. Okay? So it's very difficult to unpackage that kind of a history. You have a history with Japan. You've got a lot of complicated relationships with Japan. Love, hate, everything. It's not unique to America that we have this problem. It's unique to every country in the world. And it has an impact. And if you want to understand it, you have to ask questions about it, you have to talk about it, and you have to try to understand it. In America, we're trying to understand the problems of racism. Okay? So this is a study that is primarily minority. The socioeconomic status is this is a total, so it's not so different from across the index and the controls. And these are the children of the index parents. So index, remember, means that the parents were involved with the criminal justice system. And the controls are the people who weren't involved with the criminal justice. So the children of the index parents are a higher risk at both the first wave of data and the second of self-reported verbal abuse. Right? Self-reported. So here's the line. So these are all, this is a significant difference here in verbal abuse. You can see that it's elevated in most areas, but the verbal abuse is the one that's significantly different. Here, girls are at lower risk of self-reported maltreatment than boys. Why? Is it because girls are maltreated less than boys? They don't believe that, I hope. No, it's because of the stigma is different. It's different. So if you look around the world and you look at the Catholic Church, for example, the Catholic Church is trying to address the problem of abuse by priests, right? That's good. However, if you look at what they're doing, they are willing to say, come forward and tell us, and we're actually going to give you money. Right? Unheard of. How many women have you ever seen in your clinical practice who were abused? Is there anybody paying them for the abuse? No. That's part of the discrimination. So it's wonderful that the Catholic Church is taking action. Great. But it also reflects the biases that we all have. And that is that boys have more value. And so they need to be compensated because they were abused. It's simple, right? Unacceptable. We have to do something about it. All right, so here, self-reported maltreatment in boys, look, significantly different across the board. You don't believe that, but that's what they say. Okay. Children of index parents are at higher risk for psychopathology than control. And this is boys and girls. And all of these are significantly different. Here's the line of one. Any disorder, any externalizing disorder, any internalizing disorder, and separation anxiety. All of them. Very, very significant. So, girls' maltreatment and externalizing disorder, girls are at a lower risk than boys for externalizing disorder. Right? However, and that's what is in the literature, and that's supported by our data. However, again, our data goes deeper than most data. This typical relationship found here is reversed among those youth who reported sexual abuse. Okay? But if you don't ask the questions, and that's the challenge of being a good clinician, you have to ask the questions. You can't really help the person, you can't really intervene, and you can't really learn if you don't ask the question. We ask the questions, and it turns out that what's in the literature is backwards if someone has been sexually abused. Right? So girls who were sexually abused had 37 times the increase relative to boys of having an externalizing disorder. 37 times. Girls, as you know, generally have internalizing disorders, right? So these were very acting out girls. Okay? A similar trend for other kinds of abuse, verbal and physical, we also found. So this is particularly important because this has not been looked at in any detail by anyone. We have just started to look at that. And when I said earlier how important it is to always include the parent if possible, so we asked the questions of the parent about their own abuse, and we've just started to analyze that. But what we have here is that children who were exposed to domestic violence are at a higher risk of self-reported abuse than the unexposed. Look at this. Right? So what is common, it's certainly common in America and Europe, is that there is a report to the police, to the hospital, to the authorities, to the health department about domestic violence. That's more acceptable than talking about abuse. Domestic violence. What does domestic violence do to the children? Well, here you have an example. They are at higher rates of self-reported abuse if anyone bothered to ask them. So we have both. We have the parent information about the domestic violence, and we have the child self-report about abuse. And there's a very strong relationship. But you have to ask the question. So here, child neglect, and that runs the gamut of lots of things. The relationship of parental criminal justice system involvement and their child's risk of an externalizing disorder. So what you see here, again, very significant. These are the children of parents involved in the criminal justice system who were neglected, right? Any externalizing disorder. This is what they look like. Very significantly different from the rest of the population. These were not, and these were all the kids. These were not neglected. So this is, I think, probably the most important slide that I have here today. And what it tells you, and we just did, again, this analysis very recently, it's very interesting. It's trying to understand what's going on between family members that are indicators to you as clinicians who is potentially being abused. And again, domestic violence is a much more acceptable, reportable offense in any society. Nobody wants to report about children, all kinds of investigations. And sometimes you hear all of the banging with the domestic violence. You hear things being thrown around, etc. So it's easier. And what happens when you have this damage, property damage during domestic violence? This is pretty easy to find out. Well, a policeman goes and does an investigation about domestic violence and this property damage. What does that mean for the children? Well, you can see all of these things were significantly different for people, for children who were in a home that there was domestic violence investigated. Okay? So, again, the relationship of the parent and the child, it's not just sexual abuse here, but it's very high. It's everything. It's negligence, it's verbal abuse, it's physical abuse, it's physical and sexual abuse, it's physical, sexual, and other, or it's any abuse. So when you want to think about how you could get started doing intervention, how you could get started trying to prevent child abuse, think about the collaborators that you should work with. In this case, I don't know, maybe it's the police, maybe it's social welfare, whoever it is, whoever gets the information about domestic violence should be your partner. Should be your partner to try to get to the children. Because this tells you that those children, if they are in a household that is experiencing domestic violence in which there's property damage, they throw the chair, or they break the window, or they hit the door, or whatever they do, that those children are extremely highly at risk for having experienced these kinds of abuse. So it's a great place to start. It's a great place to ask questions when someone comes in for domestic violence. Okay? So, parents who were physically abused as a child themselves, and again, you have to ask the question. If they were physically abused themselves, it exacerbates the daughter's risk of having separation anxiety and internalizing disorder. And again, my colleague, Dr. Rantel, is going to talk more about this kind of relationship, but this is clear from the children's data that, in fact, if you have separation anxiety, that's this group here, these are the daughters of parents abused as children. Right? So when you have an adult, you see an adult, and in your work with that parent, and find out that they were abused, you have to think about their children. You have to think about their children, because their children are very likely to also be being abused. By that person that you're working with, that mother, that father, by your neighbor, by your brother, whatever. There is likelihood, a much greater likelihood, that their child is also being abused. And this clearly shows that. Okay? And here's any internalizing disorder. These are the daughters of parents abused as children. And we don't usually ask those questions, and we should. So that's the end of my talk. You cannot do this work without lots and lots of people. I am fortunate to have this cast of characters here who are on my team, and I'm most appreciative of all of them. And I would be happy to answer any questions, however this works. I'm happy to do it. Thank you very much.